Today we will look at the file handling very briefly, and I try to show you in both ways in idle as well as use of Google Colab. And then we'll switch to data structures. We will look at different ways of storing data, and that will be the basis for our next session. Especially the next couple of sessions, we are going to look at more on data analysis aspect. And for that, we should know like how we can store data in different ways in Python. So mainly our focus today is that. So we'll be looking at how to handle lists, tuples, sets as well as dictionaries, right? That's the plan. So having said that, let me quickly switch to the slides. You can see the slides. Yes. Okay. Um, so in the first session, actually, I have given a very brief introduction to why we need Python as well as what software tools I'll be using in the sessions. So as already you know, I'm using the standard idle session, which you will get when you install Python. It's called idle. And the next one I'm going to use is Google. So like in Gmail and Google Docs and so on, there's a place where you can run uh, Python as a notebook. We call Jupyter notebooks. That's quite popular in data analytics area. So I'll be using that one as well. So I will, most of the time I'll be using both, but so hopefully the in the middle of the session, I'll be totally going to switch to Google Colab because when it comes to data analytics, it's very easy for you to work with Google Colab. So for the initial ones, I use idle because then you need to have the basic understanding, right? Let me share. Um, so these are the references, and then we will be discussing like basic functionalities available as well as what Python libraries you have to use for different various tasks. Um, and especially I point out places where you can start learning Python as well as some libraries that you should know, especially if you're into data analytics. Right. And then there were questions on sometimes, especially there were questions from the civil engineering side, whether people use Python, of course. And these are some of the links actually I have found uh, uh, where they talk a lot on how Python is used in different areas. So that's might be helpful if you're working in civil engineering, but there are a lot of other application areas as well. Right. And then we discuss the very basics. The few things that we need to know is Python is a dynamic type, which means we need to define the data types in the very beginning. Like if you learn C, for example, you have to define it first what kind of variable you are going to use. But in Python, it may vary because the same variable, it could be in integer type or floating point type or string. So depend on where you use Python interpreter, decides on that. So that's what the basically we will learn in the very beginning, the different types of data types we had. So we were looking at the integer type, float, as well as complex type, and then to check that one, we use what we call the type function. So I'll be using this, so you'll be familiar if you're not attended the first previous sessions. And then we also discuss handling strings in Python. Basically, single quotes and double quotes are used to represent strings in Python. And if you need to, represent multiple lines, then we use triple single quotes or triple double quotes. Right. And then we were discussing how may use different operations for arithmetic operations. So we have discussed this earlier. And then some operations in the strings, which I will discuss today. Also, we will discuss the sessions after the data structures. Again, I'll be revisiting manipulation of strings. Then we discuss the converter functions. Once you store some data in a variable, I told you that default will commit, but if you want to change to another data type, for that we have what we call the type convert functions. So depend on what you want to do, time to time you may have to use these functions. Then we discuss the getting user inputs, input function. Now, usually whatever user enters as taken as a string, so that you need to remember. And then you need to use some time converter function. Now, for example, here, right, you have to use converter function, right, like integer here, to convert the string value to int value, right. Then we actually discuss the outputs, different ways of representing this. You can just use print, and then you can actually use a formatting string, exactly how you want to print something in Python. And then finally, we also discuss use of format function in available Python. This is sometimes we call Pythonian way of, you know, uh, making outputs, right? Okay, so then last time we discussed the control structures. For that, we started with the Boolean types, especially true, false. And then, so when you use comparison operators, logical operations, usually the output will be a Boolean value. And that can be used for the control structures. So the selections, usually we use of if, else, and elif. So that part we discussed last time, use of if, and then usually you have the condition and the colon to indicate that that's the end of if, and then within that one you will have the statements. Make sure that you intended properly, meaning like you have to have spaces, and because there's no end if statement in Python, and this spacing or indentation actually take care of the start of the block and end of the block. For example, here this particular statement is within if statement. So if you have you have a condition and you have two outputs. If it is true, then one thing, and if it is not, then another thing. So we have if and else structures. Again, you will see here you have the condition. Then this is indented, meaning like you have put up the spaces, and which will say that, okay, if the condition is true, you are going to execute this statement, or else, so this is else and colon, make a note of this, and then you have fail. So there's no indif again. Indentation is very, very important. So here is how we will have nested ifs. So sometimes you know that you have nested selection statements. So this is one example where you have another if statement within this if. So after else, you have another if statement. Now, if you need the compact representation, now here we have if else, and again within this we have if else. So we discuss else if. You can connect this in Python. We have elif, and then you can put up the condition, which actually we can use it for compact representation when it comes to Python. Right, and then we were discussing the writing loops. While loop we discuss, again, remember the indentation. You have to properly indent them, otherwise you will get an error for that. And then we discuss the for loop. For that, we actually do use the function called range function. So the what this function does, basically, if you have only one argument, it means you start with 0, goes up to that value. Now, for example, when you say range 5, start with always 0 and goes up to 4, not including 5. But if you have two values, that is start and stop, which means you start with the first number, that means 1, 2, 3, and goes up to the second number. So that's what we get 1, 2, 3, 4. And finally, if you have three numbers, that is start, stop, and step, which means you start with 1 and increase the value by 2. right? So that's what you will get 1, 3, not including 5, goes up to 5. So I have to take this call. Okay, some of the participants requested me to send the link. So give me a couple of minutes to send them. Okay, let's start again. So let me switch off. Okay, sorry, I forgot to resend the link. But remember the link I have shared with the first email, and it won't change. I'll be using the same link throughout the sessions. Okay, so we'll be discussing the range function, and then that is used with the for loop. For example, in this one, the number variable number goes in the range of 1 comma 11, meaning you start with 1 goes up to 10. So it will print numbers from 1 to 10. So this is what we have discussed last time. And finally, I finished the last week session with defining function. So I will quickly start looking at that one. So first of all, let me share the my idle. So what you have to do, basically, you go to, I'm assuming that you have installed Python. If you not, I will show you another way to do this. So I will start with idle. Let me share the screen. So if you start with idle, you will get something like this. If you have idle with you, that means if you have installed Python, you can start here. So what we have discussed at the end is creating functions, creating own user functions. Basically, if you say, let's say I'm adding two numbers, let's say 2 comma 3. So there's no function called add function. So, but we discuss how to create them using def, and then you put add, and then you define the variables, let's say number 1 and number 2, and then we have colon, and then you say what you want to do with the function. So I'm getting two variables here, number 1 and number 2. Basically, I want to add them, let's say. So I can say two ways. One thing is without returning, I can just say print number 1 plus number 2. Simply, this is the uh, basic definition for adding two numbers. So likewise, depending on the requirement, you can define the function. So once you define this, now you can use it. This is called calling. So you can say add 2 comma 3 or whatever the numbers, right? So this is a simple use of creating user defined functions, right? Those who do not have Python installed, so let me quickly show you, since I'm going to start from there today. Uh, Use a browser. Go to Google Colab, colab.research.google.com. So you will get something like this, and create new note. You use create new note, click on new notebook. You go to file, new notebook. And you should be getting something like this. Now this is we call cell, and this is for the coding. So you see a play button here. So you can simply type the Python codes. So let me say, just say add 2 comma 3. There's no function to call add. So it will complain that there will be an error. So when you play run, it says name add is not defined. So there's nothing called add here. So let me define it first. So let me say def add number one comma number two. So which will use two uh, variables, input parameters here. We can say print number one plus number two, right? Now what happens here, we actually define the our function add, taking two. Here we have number one and number two, right? And then we'll print it. So when we run it, you will see now you can use this function. Let me add another one. You'll see the output like this. So if you have any difficulties doing this in the Colab environment, please let me know in the chat so that I can help you. Right. Assuming you are comfortable with this one, let me change the way this will run. right? So I'm going to create another code window, another cell, and then I'm going to try to define the function with return value, right? Let me say this is the same function with the version 2. I'm going to say number 1, number 2. That means 2 parameters I have get. Now, instead of printing this, I'm going to use return number 1 plus number 2. Right. Now, if you just call this, I'm going to use the same way 2 comma 3 like earlier. So there will be no changes, no visible changes, no visible changes. But then if you, let's say, so how this will execute, what happens when you call this function, this is a calling function. This is how we call in function, right? So when you call the functions, what happens? This 2 will be assigned to number 1, 3 will assign to number 2, right? And then the output is there. There's no value coming back. But here, it's not like that. So in this particular case, this is number 1, and this is number 2. And it will say return. When you return, it will actually return to the main program, right? So that's one of the changes if you use a return. So which means you can store and further manipulate. You can further manipulate. Now, for example, if I type like this, I can hold this value. So let me say the answer, right? And then I can say print answer. So I can do this here, right? So what happens? I told you, you send 2 and 3 to these two, and then the answer you will get back here. So that is why you can store this value here. But here you can't. Now, for example, if you type here, let me do the same here. If you say answer, and if you say print answer, if you run it, you will get 2 answers, because here itself, it will print it. So that's why you get 5, because when you send it, it says print. So you'll get 5, but nothing comes back. So that's why in Python, you will get none here, right? So if you need to get back the answer and store and proceed, so make sure that you write the function with the return value. So usually this is the way we use to write functions, with the return function, return statement, right? So here normally we will say, you can, if you want to directly call it, you can call the function. Any questions, difficulties you might be facing? I hope you are trying out this in your terminals. In case if you are getting any errors, so please let me know in the chat. You can copy paste the error message, so that I can help you. So that's about the functions, right? Today we will look at like how you don't have to write many of these functions by yourself, because there are a lot of libraries available. You to just learn how to make use of those functions available, right? That part I will cover today. So if you finish, please let me know in the chat that you have done. I can move on to the next topic. Right. Okay. If you have missed already this code, I have sent you as the handout too, so you can have a look at there as well. Right. So we have just discussed the function and calling the function. We discuss how you may call once you create a function. And some of the functions, they return the values. That's what we have seen with the second version of the add function, which you can further process this. What happens there is you will get the return value, right? So some sample codes are there you to try out. Right. Since you are going to maybe write your own code, those who are going to write, so knowing that how variables work with the functions is very, very important. In this slide, what I want to stress here is how variables work inside the function, right? Now you see in this particular code, you have variable A assigned to 0, and there'll be a function called change A. Inside that, you have a variable A equals 1, right? And these three statements basically, this is will be the main program. Make use of this print A, change A, calling the function, and just print A. Okay, without typing this in your terminal, I want you to send me the answers for this. What will be the output of this code? Any guesses without typing? Once you answer me, you can, go ahead. Yes, I'm getting answers from Dr. Herrera, Dr. Idrising. Yes, good. How about the others? You can make a mistake. It's okay. Perfectly all right. I just want to understand whether you understand this code or not. That's all. Yes, Ms. Ratnapal also answered the question. Thanks. How about the others? Okay, Dr. Gamagi also answered this. Good one. Okay, Samar. Okay, so let me quickly tell you the answer. So many of you said, except Ms. Ratnapala said it's 0 and 1. Yes, that's what you expect, isn't it? Just by looking at the code. Yes, you might think, okay, when you say print A, the value is initially 0. So you expect 0 here. So you may think this is 0. And then you are calling the function. Yes, you call the function. And you think that, it will change the value to 1, right? And then you expect 1 here. Why don't you type this code and see the result yourself? Now let's move to my session. I mean, like I will go back to my Colab version. Quickly, let's type the code. Let me take another code window. As everybody said, we expect the answer will be 0 1. Why did you try out now? So what we had is a equals 0, and there will be a function def change a, and within that we will say a equals 1, right? So that's all. The three commands we had: print a and change a, and again print a. If you run this, you will see many of you expected 0, 0, 0, 1, but the answer actually 0, 0. Okay, I want to stress this. When you define variable within the functions, it will be local to that function. Local means this is not visible to outside, right? Whatever the variables you create inside will not be seen the outside. Values are different. So that's why we are getting 0, 0. Although you say print a, change a, it won't change the value in outside a here because this is inside. This is what we call local to the, so we call local variable. So whatever the a defined within the function is local to this. Okay, I'm going to just copy this one. I'm going to take another window, code window. I'm putting this again. Let's say you expect 0 and 1. Then you have to mention explicitly this. So whatever inside the function, you have to say that this a and that a is the same. So for that, we have to say global a. Now, if you run this, now we are getting 0 and 1. So remember this, this is sometimes if you're writing Python functions for your own purpose, make sure that you understand whatever the variable you put inside will not be visible to the outside. If you wanted to do that, so you have to define the variables as global variables. Right. So that's another thing that I want to stress when we talk about the function. Again, if you have finished this part, please let me know in the chat so that I can move to the next one. By the way, those who are new today, what I'm using right now is a Google Colab environment. If you have a Gmail account, you can go to that and you can start typing. So the web address is colab.research.google.com. So you don't need to install Python in your machine. You can just visit this link and then create a new notebook and then you can just type. Okay, so what we have just discussed finished is a local variables. If you define something within a function, that variable is local to that function. It will not be visible to the outside. So that's why in the initial one, we are getting 0 and 0. Whereas the next one, when you say globally, so then whatever the outside variables will be the same as the inside. So you get 0 and 1 here. Okay, some of you have already finished, so maybe I can switch to the next topic there. I would like to briefly look at right? So this is from the slides. I already shared you with the slides. So the local variables, whatever the variables created inside the function are local to the function, and those variables cannot be used outside the function. Right. So there's a request from Ms. Ratnampala regarding how to do type multiple lines, the codes in multiple line. Okay. Um, let me uh, let me explain after finishing this one. Right. So then global, meaning like if you want to make use of outside the function, then I told you you have to use global variable. You have to declare variables as global variables, and that's what we get from here. Right. Now, before I move to file handling, so let me quickly go to and show you how you may do this in idle. Now, when you are going to have idle, this is idle session. I think I mentioned this earlier. If you're using idle and if you want to type something, it's not like the Colab environment, it's like a notebook. But here you can just type one or two functions. But if you want to type a code with multiple lines, you should go to file and new file, and you should be getting a new window, something like this. Now let me divide the screen to two so that now I can share. This is the new window I got. How I got it? I said file and new file. Right. Now let me type the previous code. So in my case, what I did, a equals 0. Then I said def change a, and we said a equals 1. And the 3 lines, I will said print a, change a, sorry, uh, and then again print a. So that's what we type. So let me save this file save. When you're saving, make sure that you type it as a Python function. I'm just going to say local variable. So it will be the Python function. Now I can say run module. What will happen? This code will be run and the output will be in the Python shell. So let me run the module. So you will see the output comes here. I hope Ms. Ratnampala, you got the answer for that question. Yes. So let's say you want to do the second one. I'm going to save as. So let me put global variable. I'm going to make the change, right? So the change what we did, if you want to visible what is inside the function to the outside, you define that variable as global variable. So if you run it now, you are getting 0 and 1. Okay. So in case you have difficulties, maybe you can spend some time on understanding this. And if again you need help, please contact me at any time. Right. Let me switch to the next one. Right. The next thing is a very important one where we use to, handle files. But basically in this one, I'm going to talk about how to create simple, files in Python, right? And later on, we will see there are already built-in functionalities available you to read existing files if you have, right? So for that, We are going to use what we call the file. There are several methods we are going to use. The first one, we need to learn about the open function. Usually open function, we have two things coming. First of all, your file name and then the mode, right? The file name is whatever the name you are expected to give for the file. Let me say test. And the mode will be like which mode you are going to use. Now, when you work with the files, you may open a file for reading, you may open a file for writing, or maybe you are just appending, meaning like you add new content, right? So the first method will be you have to open the file, we call file handler, and then when you finish work with the file, you have to close the file handler, right? So two functions you have to use when you work with file handling is open and close. And depending on what you do, you have to use other methods as well. Now, for example, you can read, you can write. Reading means you read the content of the file, you can read all the lines, or you can read one line at a time, or you can read the whole file at once, right? And finally, writing could be used to write stuff in the file. Okay, let me show you this with the first idle, since some of you asked like how you may use this in idle. So if you have Python installed, let's take a new window, right? I'm going to use a new window, file, new file. I'm going to use a new file here, right? Here is the first step. Now, when you work with the file to write, so let's say we'll write to files. The first thing you should do is open the file, right? Then at the end, you have to close the file. So make a note, you open the file and you finally close the file. So when you work with the file, make sure that you do the both opening and closing. And the next thing in the middle, what I'm going to do is writing. This is what I'm going to do. Right. The first one is I have to create a file object. Now, how I going to create this is I'm going to use open function. And in the open function, I have to type a file name. So file name, I will put it like this. That means I'm going to create a file called test.txt. And then I will put the mode. Since I'm going to open up a file, I'm going to create a file for writing. I'll put W here, right? And at the end, to close this, we can say file.close, right? Now, if whatever you want to type, you can say file.write. This is the function we have to use for writing. And then let's say I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to print Department of Computer Engineering, whatever you can type. And make sure at the end you put this. I will explain what this is. Slash and n. This is called new line character. If you miss this, what will happen? Everything will be in a single line. So this slash in, what it does, basically you will say that, okay, new line character, which means the next line we start with the, uh, to say that, okay, start with the next line. Similarly, let me type another one. Again /name. So you can write the many lines you want, right? So later we could see how we incorporate this when you want to create new files. And let me save this. I'm going to save all the codes in my C drive. You can choose whatever the folder. Let me say, okay, create file, right? Now let me show you the content inside this. So these are the content inside this my file. So nothing now, there's no file inside in this here. There's no file inside here, right? When I run this, observe what will happen. When I say run module, and here we have 5 files, right? And if you go to that folder, now you see there's a file called text. When you double click it, right, you will see that. So there are 2 lines in that file. This is how I may manually create files in Python. Any questions you might have?
Can I ask one question, Mr.
Yes,
Sampath?
yep.
Can you open more than one file at a time? One to write and one to read, or two to read and one to write? More than one file?
Yes, you have to create separate file handlers. Here I said I'm creating a file for writing. Here we have only one file, but you can create another variable, let's say file 2, and you can open up. Now, for example, here you can say, okay, file 2, and open another file, say test2.txt. And then if you want to run it, if you want to write something in that file, you have to say file2.write. And then let me say and then you have to close the file. So file, let's say 2.close. Is that what you expecting?
Yes, yes. Thank you very much.
So now you will see when I run this, there are 2 files, file test1 and we have test2. So for example, this is very, very important when we write programs, some of the data we want to save in one file, another set of data in another file. So within the code, you can do that. Right. So without complicating this, let me remove these. So those who are trying, so we'll start with the one single file. Right. So this is what I have given to you. Just try and see whether you can come up with a new file. Okay, now I would like to show you this in the Colab environment, because after that I'm not going to use this idle because we are going to switch our discussion with this Colab environment. Now, one thing before we start, I want to show you like where you normally store these files. Remember, my file name is untitled 20. This is called IPy notebook. This is Python notebook. And let me show you where we have stored. Um, it's in the drive. And in the drive, there's a separate folder called Colab notebooks, right? Colab notebooks. So I have many notebooks, but if you are like just create one or two, you should see your notebooks here. And when we create the file, hopefully we will get the new file name here, right? Hope there are no just text files names test. So let me use here. I'm going to get the code window. Let me put side by side so that we can see, right? Okay, so hopefully we will get a new file. I will sort out last modified with the date, right? So hopefully when we create a new file, it should come here, right? So let me create. So the code is, I'm going to say file. First of all, I open up a file handler with the test.txt for writing. And then I will write few lines. Shorten so that you can see this. And then I'm going to say file browse. So I'm going to run this. Hopefully, if there's no errors here, we should be getting the new file created inside the Colab notebooks folder. The reason might be the path. So let me quickly go to my drive and see. Right. Path might be the problem in this particular case, or maybe writing down in a Google server. But let me go back and read then. We'll go to next one and see, we'll see again whether we could find the file stored in Google Colab environment. Right. So let me go back to the slides again. What we have just discussed is how to, create a file. So one thing you notice, if you want to read, you have to use R. For write, you have to W. Appending, it's A, right? And this is what we have just discussed. Right. Let's say you are going to append. let's say you are going to add another 2 lines to the existing file. So what I'm going to do, the next, I'm opening the same file for this time for appending. I put A here, and then I will write 2 lines, and then I will close the file. So let me show you this with idle first. Right. So this is what we have. I'm going to make a slight changes here. So I'm going to save this as save as, and I'm going to say append file. And then I'm going to change this to append, right? So I'll be using the same file, meaning the same file here, test. Right now we have 2 lines. I'm going to add 2 more lines here. So the 2 lines is, first of all, I would like to add Peradeniya with the postal code. And finally, I'm going to say Sri Lanka. I actually changed the previous code so that I will add these 2 lines. So right now I have 2 lines here. I put A for appending. So let me say file save. When I say run module, again, you will update the file. You double click it. Now you see that, okay. So one of the mistakes I have done, I missed slash here, slash. That's why I get a different output. Let me save it again. Let me run from the beginning. Let me open the previous one, create file first. I will run module. I create the file. Okay, this is what I have, 2 lines. Then I will again run the appending one, run module. And if you go back and double click it, you will now see there are 4 lines inside the file. So basically what we did, we just appended the existing file with another 2 lines. Altogether we got 4 lines. Same thing I'm trying to do it in Colab as well. So I'll copy the same code with the new code window. So this time I'm going to append. Again, it's completed, which means that the file has created, although I couldn't figure out where it is. Let me check the issue. I'll go to Colab again. I will let you know exactly the location where they store the files. I assume that it will be the same folder as the notebook because we have not typed any. Right. Finally, I would like to show you how you may use reading the content, whatever the existing. So reading file, we can, there are many ways to do this. I will show you one way to do this. Simply one thing we need to change is instead of append A, we need to say R, that's for reading. And then you can go for line by line. Here we will use print line, and then it goes by line. Since the line already have new line character, we make sure that we'll remove this. Again, I will show you why we need this. And then finally you close. So let me explain the reading now. So what we are going to do, basically, I'm going to save this as a new file. Let me say read file, and I'm going to change the code R. Basically, I'm going to read in the file. So these lines are just the comments in Python. So to read, I'm going to use a for loop for line in file. So what happens, it's go through every line in the file. And let me first say print line. So this is not the correct one. So let me show you like the answer. When I run it, right? When I run it, run module, you see that it will print the 4 lines, but with the extra space in between. The reason is at the end, remember we put slash in new line character. To avoid this, I'm going to say end. If you remember the help function in print, we discussed this earlier, right? So we will have without ending, adding an extra slash in. So we put empty at the end. So let me save it again, file save, run module. Now we are getting the correct answer. It will actually read the content from the existing file. So you can get the output by reading a file. So this is actually very simple way of handling files that we have discussed. What you need remember is use of different functions available, open and close. And in open, we have 3 modes to operate with files. That means write, append, and read. And finally, we need to close the file. So in between, you can use write function uh, that can be used to add content, and then you can then read the content in the function using for loop we have used here to just print line inside the function, line inside the file. Let me know if you have finished up to this point so that we can move to the next one. If you have any questions, please let me know so that I can answer those. Again, these codes I have sent with the handout so you can download and see. If you couldn't get up to this part, don't worry because there are functions that we will learn later on. You don't have to do it manually. Why I did this? Because especially if you're developing piece of code in Python, you should know the basics. So that's why I covered this one. Otherwise, if you want to simply read and write content, for that we have existing library where you can use direct functions to read the file. You don't have to do it manually like this, but the understanding is very important. Okay, shall we move to the next one then? Okay, thanks. The next thing I'm going to discuss how you may use modules. That means I told you there are a lot of libraries available, how to make use of modules in Python, right? The first one I'm going to look at is use of math module. So basically, the use we can say using import. So when you say import, so that is to meaning that you are going to use a module. So there are many modules available. One thing is actually you may use very frequently is math module. So let me start with math module first, right? So these are some of the functions. Actually, you can go through the documentation if you need the full functionality, what functions available to see whether whatever the functionality that you need, whether it's available in Python. Right. So let me show you how to use them. From this point onwards, I'm actually focused only on Colab environment because this point onwards, I'm focused only in um, Google Colab environment. That means use of Python notebooks, and you will see why, right? Hopefully, next couple of sessions. So let me share the Colab environment. We have this, right? Okay. Okay. Um, okay, one thing I missed is, okay, let me just quickly type that one as well. Reading. We are getting the out, which means the file is there. Uh, but I couldn't figure out where it is actually stored. So that I will let you know in the next session. Right. Having said that, let me go to the next one. Okay. I have not discussed one thing here. There are two types of cells available, right? There are two types of cells available. For example, here, The text set, if you want to type something, you can use this. Now, what I'm going to explain here is modules. So modules, right? Then I'm going to just go. So this will be like a notebook. You can type it. If you need some extra information, you have to keep with the code itself. You can use text cells, right? I'll talk about more in coming sessions, but right now I will focus on the code. Right. I told you the first thing I'm going to use, make use of math module. Right. And for math module, there are a few functionalities available. Let me just use how to use some of them. Right. Now what we have to do is you have to say import math, and then you can call any functions you want. Now, for example, if you want to use the square root of a number, so you can say math dot square root. So when you say run, you should be getting the answer. It's not that difficult, it's very easy. Try other some functionalities. Let me show you like some of them. Um, so for example, if you want to get the pi value, right? You can just say math.pi, right? Which will give you the pi value here. If you need both the values, you make sure that you use print. Let me use print. That is pi. Logarithms, for example, you can say print math.log. If you want to have base 10, then you can type base 10. Otherwise, it will be natural logarithm. Let's say 1000. So you'll get 3. Cosine, for example. So usually it expects radians. So I can say radians. I make. So sine 30. Right. So that's about the modules. Again, if you have finished up to this point, please let me know so that I can move to the next one. Okay, good. So next thing I'm going to discuss about the different ways of, handle data. Basically, we call data structures in Python, right? So let me use a text one. Data structures. So under that, I'm going to talk about four things: list, tuples, sets, and dictionaries. Right? Let me start with the lists. What you need to remember about the list, they are ordered collection of items. So that means there'll be an order, and then you can add, remove. You can, that means change the list. So let me discuss how you may do this. Let me create a function variable. I'm going to create a list to store some numbers. So let me say number list. Remember, list starts with and ends with the square brackets like this. And whatever the values, you can comma separated. So for example, 11 to 23, 45, 50. And actually in Python, you can actually mix types as well, not like in some other languages. So you can, mix different data types if you want. Now, what happens here, if you already know, familiar with the basics, you know that. So there'll be an index that you can actually use to access individual element. So the whole list will be the number list. So for example, when you say print number list, it will print the whole list. And if you check the type of the list, it will be a list type. So it will list. So Python print, if you use square brackets, it prints as a list of numbers. Okay, now let's look at how to print individual numbers. Now, hopefully you know that there are what we call the index we can use. In Python, start with the zero index. So that means the index values, right? Index, start with zero. So that means the first value of the first index is zero, then one, then three, two, three, and it's four, which means if you need the first element access, if you want to access the first element, you can say, okay, print number list zero. So, and if you run it, you will see that you will get access the first element. That is 11, right? So let me use print here as well. Can you tell me the code for accessing the third element? How do you access the third element? Yes, we can say, okay, print third element means number list. That means index should be the second one. And if you run it, you will see it's 23. Yeah. If you want to print whole number separately, you can use a for loop. So for example, I can say for, simply you can say for, and take some variable. Let me say I. And then we can say, okay, simply we can say I in number list. You can simply put like this. And when you say print I, what happens here, it will go through each of the elements in the number list and it will print. So the each number get it as I and it will print I. Right? So the last one, so this is what we will get. So it will print one at a time. Let me take another code window to further manipulate this one. So print number list. Again, the code is with the handout, so then you can look at it. Right. Let's see the how to get the number of lines. Length. For that, you can say len comma. The function len will give you the number of items in the list. So it says there are 5 items. We have 5 items in the list. If you finish, please let me know. I can proceed with. There are a couple of more methods I want to discuss. Right. Next one. Let me add something to the end of the list. Let's add 29 to the end of the list. So I can say number list. There's a method called append. Whatever the value you give here within brackets, so that will add to the end of the list. So let me print the number list and see whether it has happened. So earlier we had 15. Now you see that when you say append, dot append, when you say 29, that 29 is added to the end of the list. Another one. Let's say I want to change the second item to 20. Second item means this is the first item, second item. So that means we know the index is 1, right? This number list. The index is 1 because it starts with 0. 1 means the second one. So I'm going to assign it to 20. Let me print again. Now you see what happens here. Earlier we had 2. Now after this one, once you change item to 20, so we have 20 as the second item. Okay, so let's look at deleting some items. So there are many techniques we use to delete. But let's say you want to delete a specific element in a list. So you can use to simply say del. So to delete, we can use del and the list name and then the index. So that's 0. So hopefully it will remove the first item, that means 11, and remain with the remaining item. So we can say print number list. Now you see after this one, it will remove the first element. If you want to remove the whole list, simple. You can just say delete and then you can say number list, which will delete the whole list. Right, now with that one, we have just discussed how to use of lists in Python. Now you need to remember a couple of things when it comes to lists. There's the order in the list. The order is preserved, right? So when you create the list, there's an order. So it's an ordered collection of items. You can add items, you can change items, right? You can remove items. So those manipulations are possible with lists. If you finish, please let me know. Then I will discuss a nested list. Right. So let me move to the next one then. Right. The next thing that we are going to discuss is called tuples. Oh, sorry, nested lists. Right. I'm going to look at nested list. This is very, very important. Later on, I will discuss even matrices. If you want to represent that, that's how we will represent the matrices in Python. You can, simply put as a list of lists, right? Okay, so let me create an empty list. So I'm going to create first, I'm going to create empty list. So let me create an empty list first. So I'm going to create a shopping cart. So I'm going to say, okay, my shopping cart. Right? I'm going to say, and it's empty. So you see, I have used square brackets. There's no values inside, right? So this time I'm going to add another list to this empty list. See whether you can understand. I'm going to have a shopping list. Append, remember, append method we discussed earlier. And I am going to have a create a list here. I'm going to say, okay, Apple and 5, meaning that I will insert Apple and 5 inside this list. I need to buy 5 apples. So if you print my shopping list, right? So when you run it, you'll take this. So this is called list of lists because this is a list inside that another list. Now, can you add 6 oranges to this one? 6 oranges. So like in previous way, my shopping list, append, orange. I'm going to say 6 oranges. If I print this again, you will see we have a list of lists. We have apple and oranges. So we have a list of lists. So we have this, the list, and within that another list. We have apple and we have fire. So this is one list. Then another list. Right? So list of list. So index works here as well. Now, for example, here, right? So this is the first element. This is the second element. So this is the first element. Index is 0, index is 1. Now let me print the first element. So let me see my shopping list within bracket 0, the way we have used earlier. If you print it, it will print apple 5. And within the list, you have another list, right? Now you see, here we have two values. Index is 0 and 1. So for example, if you want to get number of apples only, right, this is how we can write. I need number of apples. I can go to the first one, my shopping. The 0 will give you both apple as well as the number. Then we need only the number of apples. So that is 0 and 1. So it says 5. So you see now this actually example give you idea about how you may manipulate lists. When you have a nested list, so you can first of all access individual items within the list, because this is we have a list of lists. So when you say my shopping list 0, it will access whole apple 5 apples. And within that one, you can still access other elements. So in this particular case, second one, we want to know number of apples. We want to know number of apples. Okay, can you give me the code to this one? So change the number of oranges, to 8. Then I can see whether you have understood this. Can you give me the code to change the number of oranges to 8? Yes, I got one answer from Dr. Idrisin. Yes, correct. Your answer is correct. Good. How about the others? Okay, I'm getting correct answers from Dr. Gamage, Ms. Ratnapala, and Dr. Deepthi. So I think not that difficult, right? So we can say my shopping list. We can say one. Why is one? We have to select the second item. And within that, we have to change a number. It means again index is one. We have to assign this to it, right? So let me print. Yes, we are getting this answer. Okay. The similarly, you can represent matrix as well. So let me share the slide for you to try out. So matrices, you can represent using, yes, nested list. Now, for example, here the matrix, we have 3 by 3 matrix. The first line we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The simplest way to represent the is you have to make a list of lists where for each row we make a list. For example, within the list, main list, you have 1, 2, 3 in another list, 4, 5, 6 another list, 7, 8, 9 another list. So if you want to access a particular row, then you can use one index like matrix 1 will select the second row. And if you want to select the middle element, like second row and the second column, we can say matrix 1 and 1. Okay, try this in your terminal so that you are familiar with the list of lists. Let me know when you're finished so that we can move to the next one. Okay, so you have finished. Okay, last couple of minutes. Maybe we can quickly go through a small quiz. It's optional, but I encourage everyone to, participate in the quiz. Um, so that I know that what areas I should focus more on working with this. Right. So go to kahoot.it. So this is the second quiz, kahoot.it. Those who are not familiar, I am sending the code, the link for this. Kahoot.it, and you should be getting a request code. You have about 8 questions, very simple ones. So when you go to kahoot.it, you are asked to enter the game pin, type 7229902. Okay. Thank you all. Then hopefully we will meet next week. Next week, my plan is to look at numerical Python. Please go through what we have done earlier, especially list part. Make sure that you understand correctly. And we start in numerical Python and matrix handling, matrix manipulation next week. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.